Hello everyone, I am Jessica Day George, and I just wanted to make a quick little video to talk about my latest book, The Writer's Reign, which I'm very excited about. And during this weird time, I'm recording this from the middle of a pandemic. I'm not going to be able to go out and tour and do any in-person signings and things like that, so I'm going to be doing virtual events. With the King's English and hopefully some other bookstores, but I also just thought I would get myself a little YouTube channel and just start talking about whatever on my own YouTube channel. So I don't know how regularly I'll do this, but let me at least tell you about this book, which is the last book in the Rose Legacy trilogy. First book was The Rose Legacy, the second book was The Queen's Secret, and this is The Writer's Reign. And kind of like the pun, it's both, reign like a king reigns, but it's also a pun for reins, horses, bridles, reins. So I was very pleased. My editor actually had to suggest this because I'm terrible with titles, and when she suggested it, I laughed, and I was like, that's perfect. So this is the third book in a trilogy. It is actually based off of, not this book particularly, but the idea of the horses is based off of a story I started writing in my Cabbage Patch Kid journal when I was probably 12 or 13 years old, and I never really used a journal for anything you're supposed to use a journal for. I had a teddy bear one, I had Cabbage Patch Kid, I had, just a big old plain one that said journal, but all I actually did with them was I would write little bits and pieces of stories in them after I decided that I was going to be a writer when I grew up. Which I did when I was about 11 and in 5th grade. And when I decided I was going to be a writer, of course, you had to write something, but I was really good at coming up with story ideas, not so great about following through. Sometimes I only had a sentence or two, like, she woke up and it was night, or something like that. Very dramatic, and I usually used either a blue pen that had a really wide tip and so bled a lot and made it impossible to read, or I had this very cool pencil that had 4 different colors in the lead, and so it made a rainbow as you wrote, and I loved writing with that, even though at some points you couldn't really see it because the color was so light. I think it was yellow with the one part. Anyway, terrible pencil for writing stories with, but I did it anyway. And I started writing a story about a girl and her horse, and it was me. It was me and my horse that I was going to have, because I always wanted to have a horse. I've always wanted to have a horse. I still love horses. Since I can't even be moved to dust my own house, I know that I would be terrible at taking good care of a horse, and I came to that realization in high school. So I don't know if I really want to own a horse anymore. Maybe if I had millions and millions of dollars and could have my own stable with people to take care of the horses when I wasn't riding them, that would be great. But otherwise, I don't want to own a horse anymore. But I did then. I did until well into high school. From the time I was little, they're just next to dragons, probably my favorite animal. And so I wanted a horse and was always thinking about riding my own horse. And I would jump on the trampoline in our backyard, just in a circle, just jump, 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 jump. And my brothers would be like, what are you doing out there? That is so boring. You never flip, you never do any stunts. And I was like, oh, it's fine. But what I didn't want to tell them was that I was constantly making up stories where I was riding a horse. I was constantly making up stories about me and my horse. And this is the one I wrote down, was about a girl and her horse. And there was something, I didn't really get into the details or the world building very well, but I knew a couple of things. I knew that she could feel what the horse was feeling, and the horse could feel what she was feeling. Not necessarily telepathy, but they could feel each other's emotions. And I also knew that there was a reason why she shouldn't have a horse. Horses were bad in some way. You weren't supposed to be riding a horse. So the main character, was breaking all the rules by having a horse. And so she had her secret special horse that she had to hide from people, and she could feel what the horse was feeling. The other thing I knew was that one of the people trying to take her horse away was her uncle. Now, to this day, I do not know why, but most of my first stories in some way had the bad guy be the uncle. There was always an uncle who was bad, and I love my uncles. My uncles are great. I have no idea why there was no evil stepmother. I mean, maybe, I guess, I couldn't go the evil stepmother route of so many fairy tales because I don't have a stepmother of any kind, and since I was writing the stories a lot about me, I didn't want to like pretend that either of my parents were dead or anything like that, I guess. So no evil stepmother for me. I had to have evil uncles instead. Um, so I wrote this story in a Cabbage Patch Kid journal, and what that part really became was actually the first part of the first draft of what became the Rose Legacy. It was called The Horse Brigade for many years, so some of you may have heard me read the first couple of chapters of something called The Horse Brigade years ago. I used to read it all the time at conferences and stuff like that because I really loved that beginning, and it was not word for word, but very strongly based on that original story that I started. It was one of the longest stories that I wrote in my little journal. It was probably 4 whole pages long, which was long for me back then, especially handwritten. I have terrible handwriting and I hate writing by hand, but I became a really fast typist in high school on my dad's typewriter, and I loved typing on his big typewriter, and I love typing to this day because I'm good at it. I'm not good at writing things by hand. So I wrote my stories in my Cabbage Patch Kid journal, turned it into The Rose Legacy. And as soon as I started writing it as a book, I knew that it was going to be a trilogy because I wanted to have this arc. I wanted to have this arc of her finding her horse, capital H, the horse that was meant to be sort of her soulmate. And so I knew that in the first book that the journey was going to be her and her horse coming together. And then I wanted the second book to be a battle or something very dramatic and exciting that would be like the only thing that can save them is horses, even though everybody else but her hates them. They have to rely on the horses to save the world. So I knew that was going to be the second book. And then the third book, all I knew was that the third book was going to be basically them campaigning for the horses to be accepted into society. And I have no idea if it's some sort of subconscious metaphor for anything. I really was not thinking that deeply about it. So if you want to say it as a metaphor to anything, you go for it. You make that metaphor. You make it work. I had nothing in mind except I wanted to have a final scene being basically a parade or a festival or an award ceremony of some kind where the horses and their riders are recognized for the contribution that they have made to society. And that's what I wanted to be at the end. And I had that plan from the very beginning, was that I wanted to have this amazing ending of these people who are outside of society and their horses that are definitely outside of society being accepted into society. Now, whether or not they get there, that you'll have to read the book to find out. Because, as anyone who's ever tried to write anything knows, once you get going, you start to realize that things have to be really different from what you originally imagined. I originally imagined this series to be set in England during World War I, in England and France. It was going to be a World War I story like War Horse, but some of the cavalry horses were going to be magic. And I actually started doing some research into World War I and then realized that is just too big of a task and it's too hard to really do justice to those real stories of the people who fought and died there. And I just don't feel up to that task. I'm afraid I'm a much more frivolous writer. So I took it to a fantasy world that's very much like England and Europe during World War I, though. And so that's what my story is, and you'll have to see how it matched with my original vision by reading the whole thing and to find out what happened and if they get their horses to be accepted by society or not, and if they get to fight in any battles or not, and if they do save the world or not. You'll have to read the books to find out, but that's very much the trajectory of these books, and I'm very proud of them. I'm kind of sad that they're ending, but also very excited because it's been so many years I've been working on these. I mean, not just from the time I was 12, but just in the actual writing these books has actually taken a lot longer than some of my other books, and so I'm very excited for these to finally be out in the world so that you guys can read about my beautiful horses as well. So I hope you enjoy The Writer's Reign. Thanks very much.